The positions you're going to see in this video are solved endgames, meaning that if both sides play perfectly, either a win or a draw is guaranteed. These are very basic concepts, but once you master them, they will serve as the foundation for understanding more advanced ideas. When you're getting down to the end of the game, these are often the kind of positions you should aim to either be recreating or avoiding to get a more desirable outcome. So this is our first position. This is one of the most basic concepts that you will see everywhere that will help guide your understanding of pretty much every single king and pawn endgame, and that is the idea of opposition. So first let me ask you, in this position, is white playing for a win or is it a draw? Now, this is kind of a trick question because the answer is it depends on whose move it is. If it's white's turn to move, this position is a draw, but if it's black's turn to move, then the position is winning for white. And the reason this is that white has stepped into the opposition. That means that across this invisible barrier, white has made some move that has put these two kings in a face-off. So white's plan in this position is to use the king to escort the pawn all the way up to the square where it can promote to a queen. Black basically wants to prevent that from happening at all costs, or at least slow it down. So if black wants to stay close to the pawn and the king and moves off to the side, we will not step into the opposition again because that's kind of wasting time, but we will go the opposite way and move up. Now if black steps in front of the pawn again, we will again take the opposition, always staying on this file right in front of the pawn. Now the most principled way that black can hang on to this position is just to make the process as long as possible for white, but we can eventually get black into this position where they are on the back rank on the square where our pawn eventually wants to promote, and they can no longer continue to go backwards. Now, if black goes off to the side, we can go here. Basically, our main idea is we want our king to be controlling this square, rolling out the red carpet for the pawn eventually to promote. We can also just start pushing the pawn in this position, and even if black takes the opposition, we do have a waiting move with this pawn. There's a lot of ways to win here just because the kings are so close to the back rank. But now say if black goes here again, now we can step to the side, roll out the red carpet. And if black tries to stay as close as possible, we can check. If they go up, we can check. And even though black is also hanging on to this promotion square, it doesn't matter because if the king is protecting something, the other king can't grab it. So we can promote to a queen, and hopefully you know how to win this endgame. Now let's go back to the starting position and let's say that it is white to move. And like I said earlier, this is a draw. And in fact, let's flip the board and let's see why. So white is trying to promote the pawn, cannot move it right now because the king is in the way. If the king steps to the side, we will follow it. If you remember from our last example, we never moved the pawn next to the king because we always want the king to be in front, again, rolling out that red carpet and paving the way for the pawn to promote. But in this position, it doesn't really matter because the kings are just going to dance back and forth anyway. So if white does try to make some progress, push the pawn forward, can even go forward 2 squares, let's say we do that, we always want to stay touching the pawn if at all possible. So we can go like this, this. Now we can't stay touching the pawn, but we do want to stay in front of it. So we want to be bouncing back and forth between these 2 squares most of the time. So we can go back here. And now whichever way the white king goes, so if it goes off to the right like this, we will follow it. So we'll go this way. And now if, white goes back, we hold on to the pawn again. That's our first order of business, is touching the pawn. If the king goes all the way around this way, we will stay in front of the pawn and we will go in front of the king again. And we will continue this process, always trying to go in front of the pawn when possible and then following the king if not possible. So we stay in front of the pawn, follow the king. If the pawn pushes, we hold on to it. And we will go all the way to the other side of the board. And eventually you will see, again, follow the king. If the pawn pushes, we stay in front of it, and now this position is a stalemate because the pawn is covering these 2 squares and the king is covering these 2 squares. So we're basically replicating this stalemate position as many times as possible all the way down the file. So this technique works in every single position unless the pawn is on one of the side files, the A or the H files. So let's move our pieces over, and you can pretty quickly see that normally if the black king were to go here, our technique would be to go, to this square, but we can't. We'd be throwing our king off the board. And so as long as the black king is able to get over to this corner, it is a draw. It doesn't matter how many pawns you have on the side of the board, it's a drawn position if the opposite king can get to this corner and just bup back and forth forever. So even if the king starts over here, there's no way that the white king can reach this promotion square before the black king does. Even if it's white's turn to move, there's just no possible way for us to sneak in, and black will hold on here and just basically go back and forth. We can push the pawn all the way to the end, and it's a stalemate. Now let's talk about another important concept that comes up a lot, and that is the rule of the square. So this helps you quickly be able to see whether the opposing king will be able to stop our pawn from promoting if our king is not close enough to assist. So the easiest way I've found to quickly visualize this is actually to draw a triangle from our pawn to the edge of the board where our pawn is going to promote, and then back down to the same row that our pawn is on, and then we can complete the square from there. If the opposing king is inside any of these squares, then we'll know that it's a draw because the king will be able to stop the pawn from promoting. But in this example, the black king is outside of the square, and so if we play this out, you can pretty quickly see that the king will not be able to stop this pawn in time. Now, I remember when I first learned this, my first question was, well, does it matter whose turn it is to move when you draw the square? And the answer is yes, it does. So if it's black's turn to move and they step into the square, well, now they're in the square, and so it is a draw. So the easiest way to remember this is to imagine if the black king is right behind the pawn. Now remember that this pawn is the corner of the square, so if it's black's turn to move, they step into the square, well, they'll just take our pawn. But if it's white's turn to move, black is not in the square, and so we can run, and there's no way for the black king to catch up, and we'll promote. Now let's look at this example where we have two pawns. Our king is very far away, but the black king is very close to our pawns, and it may look like it's just going to be a draw here. Black's going to eat up all the white pawns, and there won't be any left to promote. But in fact, these are very strong pawns because they are right next to each other, and they're called connected passers. So white's idea is to slowly bring the king to assist the pawns promoting, and these pawns can actually take care of themselves. Meanwhile, the black king can never actually capture these pawns because if we play this out, if the king goes for this pawn, which is the only one they can take because this one is protected by its friend, then remember the rule of the square? Black's outside the square. We can just run this pawn up and there's no way for black to catch up. So black's best try is to simply wait around and basically allow white to get closer and closer until we are close enough to start rolling out that red carpet. And it is a lot easier with two pawns than just one pawn. We don't have to worry as much about opposition, and this should be an easy win for white. Now here we have a very similar position, two pawns again, but this time they're not holding hands, they're not connected passers, and our king is still very far away. But this is also winning for white. We will slowly walk the king over to assist the pawns on their path to promotion, and if black ever gets too close, we will use the threat of one of the pawns taking off and running away to prevent black from ever taking either of those pawns. So what does that look like? Well, if black goes after one of the pawns, we will push the other one. And now, as we saw before, if black goes behind this pawn, they're outside of the square and we can go forward and promote, easy. So black has to back up, and then we will start to bring the king forward. And as soon as black goes here, we want to push this other pawn. We want this exact formation when it's black to move. Now again, if black goes after one of our other pawns, we will push the opposite pawn, force black to go backwards, because again, if they take, we'll run. And then we will continue to bring the king. As soon as black goes here, again, we take on this weird looking formation. Now again, if black goes here, we push, black has to go back, we keep bringing the king. We will take on this position, and once the king gets close enough, we don't have to worry about this as much because the king will just be able to use one of the pawns as kind of a decoy and just worry about promoting the other one. And now if black goes here, there's actually no stopping the promotion because this pawn covers this square, this pawn covers this square, and there's no way to get over here and stop the pawn in time. Now, the further out the pawns are spaced on the board, actually the easier it is because, again, we can use one of the pawns as a decoy to deflect the black king away and promote the other one. So if black goes after this pawn, we can push the other one. If black takes it, easy path to promotion, and same if we go the other way. If black goes here, we push the other pawn, and if black tries to get back into the square, we can actually just push this pawn too and slowly threaten to promote both of the pawns at the same time. Now in this example, we have introduced an opponent's pawn for the first time, and this concept is called the pawn breakthrough. So when the kings are really far away like this, obviously in a normal game, they're usually not going to be in like opposite corners, but just for the sake of illustration, when they're too far away to assist, we can actually use one of our pawns as a sacrifice in order to clear the way for this pawn to promote. So if black takes, now our f pawn can move forward and there is a bit of a pawn race, but we will promote first with check and we will easily win this pawn as well. So the pawn breakthrough is a great idea to remember when your pawns are a little bit more advanced and when the kings are really far away. And as with all of these examples, this can come into play in much more complex positions with way more pawns on the board, and often a lot of these concepts will be sort of at play as you're maneuvering your king and your pawns through very complicated pawn endgames, so it's really good to have the basics down. If you're looking for more resources on pawn endgames, chess.com has drills that can help you practice these endgames and more again and again. There are also great books out there. 100 Endgames You Must Know is a great place to start. And I would really recommend reviewing these endgame concepts as much as possible so that when they come up in a game, you are ready. You can basically play them out in your sleep. Thanks so much for watching. If you like this video, please consider subscribing. It helps me out a lot, and I'll see you soon.